Imagine being stopped by a police officer who doesn't know who you are, but you're one of the most powerful legal figures in the country. That's exactly what happened when a cop pulled over the U.S. Attorney General, mistaking him for just another driver. Tensions escalated quickly, with the officer not holding back his authority. Words were exchanged, accusations flew, and before long, the situation took a shocking turn. The officer, unaware of the man's high-ranking position, even pointed a gun at him, leaving onlookers stunned. But what happened next turned the tables in the most unexpected way. Karma has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it, and this time it hit hard. Stay tuned as we unravel this intense encounter and reveal how justice found its way in a story that proves appearances can be deceiving and actions have consequences. It all started on a quiet afternoon when the U.S. Attorney General, driving back from a meeting, was stopped by a local police officer for what seemed like a routine traffic violation. The officer, stern and authoritative, approached the car, clearly unaware of who he was dealing with. The Attorney General, calm but confused, handed over his license and politely explained his identity. But the officer, skeptical and visibly irritated, dismissed the explanation. To him, this was just another driver trying to talk their way out of trouble. What began as a routine stop quickly spiraled into something more intense. The officer grew more confrontational, accusing the driver of being disrespectful. Passers-by started gathering, their curiosity piqued by the escalating situation. The tension reached a boiling point when the officer made a bold and alarming decision. What would happen next would leave everyone in shock and set the stage for a dramatic twist. The Attorney General, now realizing the situation was quickly spiraling out of control, tried again to explain who he was. But every word seemed to make the officer more defensive. "Don't try to play smart with me," the cop barked, cutting him off. The growing crowd whispered among themselves, some recognizing the man in the car, others unsure of what was really happening. Inside the squad car, the officer's partner grew uneasy. Something about the situation didn't feel right, but speaking up could make things worse. Meanwhile, the Attorney General maintained his composure, knowing he had to avoid escalating the encounter. As the officer pressed for answers, the tension between authority and misjudgment became painfully clear. The Attorney General's calm demeanor seemed to irritate the officer even more, pushing him to make a shocking move that would change everything. The crowd gasped, and the story took a turn no one expected. The officer's frustration reached its peak as he demanded the Attorney General step out of the car. The crowd, now larger, stood in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. The Attorney General hesitated, knowing the situation was escalating beyond reason. "Officer, I need you to listen to me," he said firmly, trying once again to explain his position. But the officer wasn't having it. "This is your last warning," the cop growled, placing his hand on his holster. The Attorney General slowly opened the door, stepping out with his hands visible, careful not to provoke the officer further. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the officer raised his weapon, his voice trembling with authority but also uncertainty. At that moment, another figure appeared, a bystander who recognized the Attorney General and couldn't stay silent any longer. "Do you know who that is?" they shouted, their voice cutting through the tense air. The officer froze, his expression shifting as confusion and realization began to creep in. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The officer hesitated for a moment, his grip tightening on the weapon as the bystander's words echoed. "What are you talking about?" he barked, his voice wavering now. The tension was palpable. The Attorney General stood still, his hands raised, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the chaos unfolding around him. The bystander stepped forward, pointing at the man the officer had stopped. "That's the U.S. Attorney General. You're making a huge mistake." The crowd began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. The officer's face paled slightly, but he refused to lower his weapon. "Don't try to interfere," he snapped, though the doubt in his voice was clear. His partner, standing nearby, finally spoke up. Maybe we should confirm his identity, she suggested cautiously. But before the officer could respond, a black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows rolling down to reveal federal agents. The lead agent stepped out, his voice firm and commanding. "What's going on here?" he asked, immediately recognizing the Attorney General. The officer's eyes widened, and his hand shook as the reality of his actions began to sink in. The situation had reached a breaking point, but the biggest twist was still to come. As the federal agents approached, the officer's demeanor shifted from aggression to panic. He quickly holstered his weapon, but the damage was done. The lead agent confirmed the Attorney General's identity with a simple nod, his stern gaze locking on the officer. "Do you realize what you've done?" the agent asked, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a blade. The officer stammered, trying to explain himself, but there was no excuse for his actions. The Attorney General, still composed, stepped forward. "I tried to tell you who I was," he said calmly, his voice carrying both authority and disappointment. The officer's partner stood silently, her face showing a mix of regret and frustration at her colleague's behavior. Just as the officer began to apologize, the Attorney General raised a hand. "This isn't just about me. It's about how you treat people when you think no one's watching." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones capturing every moment. Then came the twist, one that no one expected. The Attorney General turned to the bystander who had spoken up earlier. "Thank you for stepping in," he said, before addressing the crowd. "This is the kind of courage and accountability we need more of." It turned out that the bystander wasn't just a witness, but a local community leader advocating for police reform. In a stunning move, the Attorney General invited them to his office to discuss real solutions. As the officer faced the consequences of his actions, the story became more than a confrontation. It became a powerful reminder of accountability, justice, and the impact of speaking up in moments that matter most. In the days that followed, the incident made headlines across the country. The officer faced disciplinary action, and his department announced plans to implement new training programs to prevent such situations in the future. Meanwhile, the Attorney General kept his promise to meet with the community leader, using the moment to shine a light on the importance of accountability and respectful policing. The bystander who spoke up became a symbol of courage, proving that one voice can make a difference. For the Attorney General, the encounter served as a reminder of how easily authority can be misused and how vital it is to remain calm and composed under pressure. As the crowd dispersed that day, many left with a deeper understanding of justice and fairness. The moment wasn't just a confrontation, it became a catalyst.